Hey there! On today's video, we're going to talk about winterizing or storing your motorcycle. In my case, I really don't winterize my bike, but there are those who live in colder, more northern areas that do. I live in the mid-Atlantic, which is pretty much the middle of the country. So winters here are what I would consider to be mild. But compared to Florida, that's a different world. They don't get much of winter at all. So they don't have to store their bikes. But I'm going to cover all of that. Let's get to it. Well, welcome. If you're here for the first time, glad you're here. If you're a returning subscriber, glad you're back. Anyhow, let's jump right into it. So, let's start with Florida. I have family in Florida. Let's start with the more southern states of the United States, or if you live in another part of the world that it's pretty much warm year-round, and you don't have to put your bike away for the winter or for a few weeks or for a month or so, then this applies to you. If you happen to put your bike away, let's say in the winter months, and it's not really even away, let's say you don't use it much in the winter months. You live in Florida. It gets cooler at night. I realize that. I know that. Once the sun goes down, temperatures drop. There are those fair weather riders. I would say I'm a fair weather rider that don't like to ride once it gets cooler, and they need jackets and gloves and things like that. So if you live in Florida, what I suggest for you, let's say you're not going to use your bike the months of late December, January, and February. And then Bike Week rolls around in the first week of March. So basically, you're putting your bike up for, what, 10, 12 weeks? Well, what I suggest for you to do is check your tire pressure, right? If you can, get the tires up off the ground, do so. Fill your fuel all the way up. If you have a carbureted bike, I suggest you put some stabilizer, but not only put stabilizer, and take the stabilizer with you to the gas station. Pour it in, or pour it in before you leave your house if it's just 2 or 3 miles down the road. Make sure you add the right amount, and maybe even a little bit extra. It's not going to hurt anything, in my opinion. I've done that. But don't follow my advice always. So, fill up, bring the bike home. Put a cover on it. Put something, a blanket. I'm not saying a cover, but cover your bike. You know, kind of like that. That's just a sheet. This one has towels. That one has a towel. So it's really just to keep the dust off of the bike. You know, I work on a lot of different things. I work on wood projects. I work on my car. I work on the motorcycle. So I make dust. So that's what, you know, these covers are good for. I'm not saying if you do have a regular motorcycle cover, go ahead and use it. Now, another thing I can say is if you store your bike outside, it's good that you have a cover, but covers can be bad at the same time because they keep in moisture, and moisture is an enemy. It's basically like your motorcycle is wet, you know, 24/7. So, you know, let's say it's a rainy week. Well, leave it covered. Once it dries up, take the cover off. Let the sun hit it a little bit, you know. Let the sun dry up all that moisture, take it for a ride. And put the cover back on. Make sure the cover is nice and dry. Put it in the sun so it dries up. And then, you're good for another couple of weeks. So, like I said, motorcycle covers can be good, but at the same time, they can be, bad. I lived in apartments, I want to say for about 4 years. And when I lived in Texas, and that's how I used to store my bike, outside. Now, I'll tell you, when I purchased my first motorcycle, I had a tarp, and it sat on the side of my house. I lived with my mom at the time. I was 18 when I started riding, and that bike never really went more than 2 weeks without being uncovered, and started it up. And even in the wintertime, and this is in Jersey, that was my first bike, and I had an itch to ride it as much as possible, even in the cold. So, during the day on a nice Saturday, if it was 40 degrees, I took it for a ride around the town, for a 10-15 minute ride. And that, it really does it good, because what is not good is starting a bike for 5 or even 10 minutes and just let it sit there. It builds up moisture in the exhaust. It builds up moisture in a lot of different areas, and it doesn't burn it off. It doesn't burn that moisture off. So if you are going to start your bike, take it for a ride. Take it for a 5-mile ride, which is probably about, 10-12 minutes. That should do it some good. If you can't take it for a ride like that, don't start it. Unless you have a carbureted bike, which, like I said, you're going to want to put fuel stabilizer in there if you have a carbureted bike. A carbureted bike, you're going to want to start it, but you're going to pay at the other end, which is on the rusty end in the exhaust and a lot of internal parts of the motorcycle. Guaranteed. It's not only me saying this. That's what the pros say. All right, so let's go up to the Mid-Atlantic now. So I live in the Mid-Atlantic. I live in the middle of the country. Our winter days, for the most part, are about 45 degrees. We do have days that are 20. Very seldom. We might have 8 of those in the whole winter. So do the same thing that you would for people who live in the South. Put a cover over it. Fill it up with fuel. But the difference is, if, or when rather, there's a nice day, jump on the bike, take it for a spin. Even if it's once every 3 weeks, and you should count, maybe put it on your calendar, put it on your phone, such and such day I rode. And 3 weeks later, if you have a fuel injected bike, a month shouldn't be bad. Now, one of the worst parts about letting the bike sit during the winter in the Mid-Atlantic, for 3 weeks to a month, is the tires. Make sure that your tires are properly aired up. And if you can get, it depends what kind of bike you have. I realize that. Sport bikes, you might want to get a pit bull type stand. Those are not cheap, I realize. Being that you have plastics on it, you can't really stick anything under the engine to lift, or under the frame to lift the bike up like you could on this BMW GS back here, or on the Harleys. So on this one, I have one of these jacks, as you can see. And that jack is, I have the bike lifted. It's probably 1/2 inch off of the ground to where there's not a lot of weight on the tires. And I try to put the jack, that stand rather, I kind of know where where the center of the bike is, so that both front and rear tires come up off the ground at the same time. It's a little bit tricky to find that spot. On the big touring bike here, I have a different jack that I put under it. I have not used it yet because this bike, I have to take it apart here in about a week or so. I think I told you that, guys, that on my last video, which is I have to take the forks off and send them back to the manufacturer because the chrome is peeling. So, fuel, Mid-Atlantic, fuel, tire, pressure, cover, right? And use the bike. Take it for a ride, at least every 3 weeks. Take it for a 10-minute ride, 10, 12-minute ride. It's not that far, you know. Wait for that perfect Saturday. 50 degrees, 45 degrees, you know. Get it at the point. That's what I do. I wait for the warmest part of the day. You know, I look at my phone and I say, this is going to be the warmest part of the day. And that's when I jump on it, you know. I know some guys are, you know, morning kind of people. My brother's an early bird kind of guy. That's not me. I'd rather jump on the bike 2 o'clock when the temperatures are at their peak. Okay, so let's get into the northern states where you guys are going to put your bike away for 2 to 3 months, some of you 4, and you're not going to touch the bike. So in that case, this goes for every bike, fuel injected or carbureted. Put the fuel stabilizer in the tank, fill the tank all the way to the very top. Drain your carburetors if you have carburetors. And that does not mean run the carburetor dry, because you're always going to have some, I'd say, you know, even up to 1/8 of an inch at the float bowl. So it's important that you drain the float bowls, you know, shut the fuel off. If you can, take the battery out and put it on a tender. If you can, put the battery. I was doing research for this topic of storing your bike, and one of the people mentioned that the cold weather is actually good for your battery because it drains less. And it wasn't so much that it drains less, but it was saying something to the effect of that the plates inside the battery in warm weather, as the battery drains, tend to crystallize or add crystals. And the more crystals, the weaker your battery gets. Well, they said that in the winter time, even though your battery is draining, those crystals are not being formed. So that it's good to keep the battery on the bike if your garage is cold. So, but put a tender on it. I don't believe in tenders 100% of the time. And in my research that I was doing, somebody else mentioned that, and they said it dries the battery up because it's constantly charging the battery. It's best to let it to fully charge it, and then let it drain some, get to 75%, and then bring it back up. Rather than have it go 100%, drop down to 90 and back up. And, you know, it's like you're not really letting it, or not that you're not letting it, you're overcharging it, if you will, and you're kind of drying it out. Now, if you have a lithium battery or a gel battery, that may not be. But I know for a fact, and I'm thinking about the Goldwing that I had, I would go through so many batteries. Like every other year, I would have to buy a battery. And when I stopped using the battery tender full time, I noticed, then I went to 3 and 4 years. So it worked for me. So that's my opinion. Now, another thing I noted that I was thinking is, if you can put the battery tender on a timer where you plug it in, and I'll show you, because I have one of those. right there. And those come in where you can do it. They have them where it's on a weekly basis. So you can put it, it's a week-long timer, and you can put it to where, let's say Monday at midnight, it comes on for an hour and a half, and that's it. So that'll be pretty cool. 3 or 4 months, guaranteed, lift the bike up off the ground. Some of these bikes, like this BMW here, come with a center stand. There's a little bit of weight on the front wheel on it. Now, the good thing is this front wheel, and I think you guys know that I mentioned that before, I have to change that wheel. I have a new tire for this bike, a new front tire. The GS also has a center stand. And again, if you want to get the front wheel up off the ground, then put something under the engine right there. It doesn't take much to lift it. So that's a must if you're storing your bike for 3 or 4 months. Another thing that I read, and I will agree with it, WD-40. What does the WD stand for? For those of you that don't know, it stands for water displacement. So it's a good idea, if you're going to store your bike for that long, to spray it down with some WD-40. So if you had to spray the bike down with WD-40, what are you spraying down? I would spray down the engine, parts of the exhaust, parts of the wheel, anything that you think can get oxidized, basically. Anything that can get rusty. A lot of motorcycles have stainless steel bolts and parts, and if they're metal, and if not, they're painted. So those are the parts that you want to spray down. Don't spray down your disc, your rotors, please, because come summertime, you go for a ride or whatever, and you're not gonna have brakes. So don't do that. Don't do the seat. Don't do brake pedals or shifter lever, but engine parts, exhaust, things like that, yes. And come springtime, you wash it off, and whatever doesn't wash off will burn off. Put some wax or whatever it is that you use, some kind of ceramic coating, spray or something like that. Wash the bike, change the oil. Why change the oil? Well, used oil, used motor oil has contaminants in it, and it starts to eat away at your engine. And you're like, probably thinking like, how much can it really? Well, it doesn't eat away a whole lot, but it's microscopic. And if you're gonna have that bike for a very long time, then yes, it's gonna start to lose performance, and things are gonna wear out faster. Okay, so it is recommended that you change the oil on the bike. Get rid of that old dirty oil. And like that, when springtime rolls around, all you have to do is start her up. So where are we? Drain the float bowls. If you have fuel injected, you can unplug start the bike. Once it burns off whatever's inside the throttle body, that's it. And the injector as well, that's gone. Spray it with some WD-40, air up the tires to the proper pressure, lift the bike up off the ground. I said change the oil, put a coat of ceramic coating on it, or wax, whatever you prefer. Steel wool in the exhaust if you got little critters. Put any kind of deterrent for critters getting in your bike. In the air filter, there's 2 places they love to go, and that is the air filter and the exhaust. And if you have dual exhaust, then put some steel wool in there. Don't forget to take it out. Put a sticker on your key fob or key ring or whatever, your key for the bike, so that when springtime rolls around, you remember to pull that steel wool off. What am I forgetting? Please put it down in the comments if there's anything that you do different than what I just mentioned. Now, one of the things I want to point out is, so I've been riding for 43 years. This is my 43rd winter that I have, had a motorcycle. And I was talking with a guy, he's been riding for 10 years. And he goes, basically he was trying to tell me that he knows as much as I do. And I look at it this way. I'm like, well, I'm not saying that you don't, that you can't know everything, but think of a 10-year-old kid and a 43-year-old man. That's kind of where I'm at. Okay, I've been riding for 43 years. So I've been through a lot of winters in my life. And everything I just told you is basically what I do. Now, I will say the biggest thing that I've always done is I ride the bike, even in the winter. And I've never had any problems. The only problem I will say I've had is I've had springtime come around. I start the bike and the battery has basically, kicked the bucket during the winter. So I'll put it on a trickle charge. It'll let me go for a ride. And when I come back, park the bike. If I come back in 2 days and it wasn't on the trickle charger, the battery, she's done. So I've been through some batteries because of winter. But other than that, no issues at all. I think you guys know I wash my bikes often, and certainly before winter, and just, do the things that are necessary so that when springtime rolls around, I am ready. So, another thing is, in the north, in really cold climate areas, it is customary to use what's called dry gas. And you put that in your fuel tank before a very cold, snap, a winter snap, because your fuel lines, if there's any water in your tank, which condensation happens, especially in the summer months, this dry gas will displace that water from your fuel tank. And why do we care about that? Because it rusts your tank. And if you've never had an old motorcycle, usually what happens is, at the back part of the tank, on the side of the kickstand, is usually where they rust out first. That's where you'll get pinholes and leaks, because that's where the water goes. It goes to the lowest point, and that's where the petcock is. So, to save your tank, put some dry gas in it. That's what I've done to all of my motorcycles. I always put dry gas in it, and it's something that you probably, where I live anyway, you just do it every 2 or 3 years is good enough. So usually what I'll do is I'll empty the garage, take all 4 bikes out, put them in the driveway, start one up, start another one up, jump on the first one, shut the second one off, go for a ride, come back, jump on the second one, start the third one, like that. So that when I'm taking off, they're not, they're not cold. It's a bit of a chore, but that's what I do. And if I can't do all of them, I'll do 2 this week, I'll do 2 next week. Anyhow, I hope this helps. You know, you have to take care of your investment. These things aren't free. And if you take good care of them, you know, who knows that springtime's not going to roll around and you're going to want a different bike. You've taken care of your bike. You got little to do with it. If you didn't do all of that stuff, you know, some people get lazy and what they want to do is just get rid of the bike. Now you got to sell it for cheaper because you didn't, you know, do a few things in the winter time. Anyhow, you all take care. Watch out with the crazy people on the roads. And I will catch you on the next one. Adios.